Well, I'm going to be preaching on people problems for the next couple weeks. Anybody have people problems? If you don't have people problems, you are the problem. Sorry to just get that right out of the bat. Ron asked, you've been preaching about the table, now you're preaching on people problems. And I guess that's right. Yeah, now that I'm asking you to have people over, you remember it's not all the way things used to be weren't all wonderful, and we used to have problems with people, and I imagine we're going to still have them in the days and weeks ahead. So yeah, we're going to be looking at people problems. Now I got bad news again. We're going to look at a story from one of the early chapters of Genesis here. The story we're reading is about 4,000 years old as of today. And the bad news is if you think that you can just wait a few more days and maybe people will get their act together, this stuff has been going on for thousands of years. We need a better solution than waiting and hoping that the other person gets their act together. We need a different solution today. So that's the bad news right off the bat. Well, let's look at this story. It's in Genesis 16, and if you have your Bibles, we're looking at Genesis 16. The story will also be up on the screens for you. And for those at home, it should be showing on the screen there. And the background of the story, this is a story of Abraham and his wife Sarah. This is before Abraham had his name changed to Abraham. So we're looking at a guy named Abraham, the same thing. His wife Sarai, later she'll be changed to Sarah, same person. And their Egyptian slave Hagar. So the background of what's happening here is that God has showed up on the scene, and he says to Abraham, he looked out on his good world that has been ruined by people, and he says, I'm going to start to fix this thing up, and I'm going to do that by pulling out a single man and his family and say, I'm going to bless this family, and through this family, all the nations of the world will be blessed. And Jesus later comes from this family, and the entire Jewish people come from this family of Abraham. And it all starts with God pulling Abraham aside, telling him and his wife, you're going to have a massive family, more numerous than the sands of the sea shore, more numerous than the stars of the sky. But the problem is, Abraham and Sarai are old, and they don't have any kids yet. And so they're scrambling, trying to figure out how this is going to happen. Now, here's where Genesis 16 picks up. Now, Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. Remember, even though God had promised this to happen, they're a little worried about this. She had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go, I'll say, to my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. The second I say I'm going to keep this PG, of course, this is what we preach on, but we all understand. Abram agreed to what Sarai said, so after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, you are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Your slave is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you think best. Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The words of the Lord aren't always pretty, but that's what's good about them. It shines just a wonderful spotlight, magnifying glass on our problems. Now, the situation that Abram and Sarai and Hagar find themselves in maybe is a little foreign to us, but the reactions to this situation are we see this happening all the time. These are very natural reactions, and I feel like we can identify with some of the feelings that are going on here. When we're talking about people problems, sometimes it's difficult to point out in any given circumstance who the problem is here in this situation. If you were to ask each one of these three people, what is the problem in this situation, each one of those three people would have given you a different answer what the problem is. To my mind, Sarai doesn't come across too good. I may call her Sarah. In fact, I may just call her Sarah. Sarah doesn't come out looking too good in this story, to my mind. Here's a person who, and maybe you know a person that's like this, is quick to put the blame on other people. First, she blames God for giving this promise and putting them in this terrible situation. Then she blames her husband, Abraham, and I'll just call him Abraham, I guess, from here on out. And it comes across as a person who you can't seem to make happy. She's the one who came up with this plan, and things went according to plan, but she's still upset about this and still passing the blame here. Like I said, she doesn't come across looking too good, but before we make Sarah the punching bag too much, we should walk a little bit in her shoes. And if God promises you a big family, and you go years and years and years and nothing happens, I will just tell you, I didn't realize this until just a few years ago, but infertility is a very difficult path to walk down. Extraordinarily stressful and desperate, and just that there's a feeling of hopelessness that comes with it that's very difficult to live with. So let's give Sarah the benefit of the doubt here. We don't know what position her husband put her in. For all we know, Abraham, for the last 10 years, has been asking Sarah, what's going on here? Come on, what's the deal? When is this going to happen? Maybe he's being passive-aggressive about it. You ever heard the term, do you know anybody that's passive-aggressive? Boy, it sure would be nice to finally be able to do what God said he was going to do. Wonder what, hopefully that will happen sometime. We just don't know what her life was like leading up to this point. And to me, the solution that Sarah went with is an act of desperation. She must have been desperate at this point to even think that this would be something that might work out. So maybe Sarah is not the person to blame in this situation. Let's look at the husband, Abraham. Some of the wives are saying, yeah, what about Abraham? What about this guy, Abram? Look at this guy, Abram. In just the few verses that we read about him here, and it's the same through most of the stories about Abraham. Even though this is the guy that God chose for this duty, he doesn't come across real good in this story either. Abraham, to me, comes across as someone who is a people pleaser, likes to avoid conflict. Every time something comes up, he says, well, yeah, hey, his wife Sarah comes up to him. Hey, I got this idea about my slave Hagar. Oh, okay, dear, whatever you think is best. All right, fine. Maybe in the back, he's like, sweet, this is crazy. But later on, when things start working out, and of course they're not going to work out. There's a terrible plan. When things start not working out, Sarah says, now you know what, Hagar's mistreating me. And what is Abraham's response? Well, do whatever you want to do, honey. Do whatever you think best, he says. Here's a guy who's just kind of that. Do you know people pleasers? Maybe yourself are one of those. The conflict avoiders. Here we've got in Sarah, we've kind of got a blame shifter, blaming everybody. And here in Abraham, we have a conflict avoider, someone who just doesn't want to deal with the conflict. Doesn't make for a very good mix. But these blame shifters and conflict avoiders, these are people we know about. I'm these people. I know what it's like to do these things. And if we were to ask Sarah even, Sarah, who do you think the problem is? I imagine Sarah would say, Hagar's the problem here. She's the one causing all this. And we say, Sarah, come on now. She's she didn't have much choice in the matter. She was your slave of all things, and you put her into this situation. And I imagine Sarah would say, yeah, but you don't know how she looks at me. You don't know, what she's been saying to me. Well, what does she say? Well, it's not so much what she said, but it's how she said it. You know what I mean? Like, when you have that in your head, that this person is the problem, they're going to be the problem no matter what in your head. And so Sarah, I'm sure, would have a list of 1,000 excuses. And if she were here, she would say, man, I wish that story would have never came and got put in the Bible. But you guys don't understand what I was dealing with here. I don't like how she treats me. Now that she's pregnant, she's all smug, she looks down at me. And everybody knows it. Everybody's talking about it in the village. Everybody knows that I'm the problem now. And she's going to put that blame on everybody else. Now, from the outside, I think it's a little easier to see where the difficulties are here and where the people problems are. And from the outside, we can look at this and say, well, a lot of these people, it's their own fault that they're in this position. Like, isn't that easy to do from an outside perspective? But from an inside perspective, it's way more difficult. It's way more difficult for the Sarahs and the Abrahams that are here in this room to say, you know what, I've got a big part to play in the mess that I find myself in. Sarah needs to ask. Maybe, well, let's look here in verse 2. We're gonna give Sarah a little bit of a hard time here. Because in Sarah's mind, she's the blame shifter, right? God put herself in this situation. It's Abraham's fault. It's God's fault. But in verse 2, she says to Abraham as she gets this idea, "The Lord has kept me from having children." Again, this is not, she's pointing fingers here. And then she says, "Go to my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." So as much as Sarah wants to say, and may want to say, and may give every excuse in the book why this is somebody else's fault, at the end of the day, this is something Sarah did and something Sarah chose so that she says she can build a family through her, any means necessary. Now, I say this to point out that usually the blame shifters, the people that are shifting blame and pointing fingers, the people that are hard to keep happy no matter what happens, even the things that they ask for happen, it's very easy for blame shifters and that type of personality to play the martyr and say, this is not something I asked for. I've been dealt a lousy hand of cards, whatever it is. But the typical response is to say that I'm the holy one in this situation. I'm just trying to follow God. I'm just trying to follow my husband. I'm just trying to do what's best for everybody else. And Sarah can point fingers all she wants, but at the end of the day, she's in this predicament because she's trying to bring out of her own doing what God said he was going to do. And she knew God's promise, but what Sarah tried to do was tried to bring it about by herself. Well, you might say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, let's look at Abraham. It's easier to see in Abraham. I'll make this more explicit here. Abraham, remember, the guy is he just goes along with whatever. He's the conflict avoider, and he wouldn't call himself the conflict avoider. He might call himself the peacemaker. Conflict avoiders love to call themselves peacemakers. The problem with conflict avoiders is, for you conflict avoiders out there, and again, I'm speaking to myself here, it doesn't always work out, does it? Conflict avoiders. You don't want to have conflict. You don't want to ruffle feathers. You don't want to do this. And so by avoiding it, you think, oh, this will make things better. But it hardly ever does. Usually, with conflict avoiders, avoiding conflict tends to blow up in your face. Conflict avoiders may like to say that they are peacemakers and call themselves that. And just like the blame shifters, conflict avoiders will like to paint themselves as the martyr in the situation. But all they're doing, both the conflict avoiders and the blame shifters, are just painting themselves with a holy brush and painting everybody else with a sinner brush. Because avoiding conflict is not making peace. Avoiding conflict is just avoiding conflict. And for most conflict avoiders, they're not avoiding conflict for righteous reasons. They're avoiding conflict because they don't like to deal with conflict. And they don't like people mad at them. And then they say, well, I'm a peacemaker. No, you're just being selfish. You just want people to like you. You just don't want conflict here. And that's why you're acting like this. And it's this. So same thing with Sarah. Abraham and Sarah, it's the same thing. They may think that they're doing this for righteous reasons, but at the end of the day, you're doing this for selfish reasons. And the first thing we need to do in our own lives is stop giving excuses for your selfish behavior and calling it holy behavior. You can paint yourself with that holiness brush all you want, but 9 times out of 10, it's not saintly reasons you're doing the things you're doing, it's selfish reasons. You say, well, I heard a couple amens, but a lot of people are going, oh, sheesh, Pastor Chad being a little bit harsh today. But that's what you're here for. You're here for some tough medicine. I got to give you some tough medicine, and I don't like it any more than you do. In fact, I may be a little more harsh today, because when I look at Abraham and Sarah, I look at myself and I go, oh, my word, it's kind of sick to see myself in these characters. But while we can sit here and we can feel sorry for ourselves, and we can feel sorry about the people that God put in our lives, and we can feel sorry for ourselves about the situation that we're in and what God put us in, what our husband put us in, and the situation our wife put us in. But your blame shifting just hurts other people. While you're trying to make yourself feel better, other people are being hurt. Your conflict avoiding may make yourself feel better, but it's hurting other people. Remember Hagar in this situation? Hagar, who's, I'll say Hagar's the poor one in this situation, right? She didn't have much choice in the matter. Because of Abram and Sarah's people problems, everything stinks for Hagar. People are getting hurt because of how they are acting. And Hagar finally gets to the point where she says, I'm done. I'm done. This is crazy. You guys are crazy. I'm out of here, she says. She says, in her distress, she runs into the desert. You got to be pretty desperate as a pregnant woman to say, I'd rather be in the desert than with these people. This is craziness. But unless something happens with our relationships, with our people problems, that's typically what happens. Someone finally has to get to the point where they say, I'm done, and this is it, I'm out of here. Because if nothing changes, then it just builds up. And the hurt that those personalities cause, those people problems cause, don't get lessened unless something changes. Well, what ends up happening here in this story? It's pretty desperate up to this point. And I will tell you, the thing that changes in this story is not anything that Abram or Sarah or Hagar do, but it's a very wonderful ending to the story, because now we have a new character that shows up in the story. And I want to read the very next verse here. We'll just read the rest of Genesis 16, because a new character shows up on the scene, and this is the angel of the Lord. Now, real quick, in the Old Testament, where the angel of the Lord shows up, this character shows up, very mysterious character that pops in every once in a while. This is the very first time, if you start in the beginning of Genesis, that we're going to see the angel of the Lord. And just a Cliff Notes version of who this is the Lord. The angel of the Lord is the Lord. It's if you were to stand before God in all his glory, you'd, I don't know what you'd do, you'd melt. It's not good. Nobody can see the Lord and live. But when the Lord wants to show up and tell somebody something in the Old Testament, it's this angel of the Lord figure. So verse 7, the angel of the Lord found Hagar. Notice, Hagar is not looking for the Lord is looking for Hagar. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her what nobody wants to hear in the middle of people problems. Go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant and you will give birth to a son. You will name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. Notice remember, the angel of the Lord is the Lord. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave him the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Now, again, a few things that we need to point out here. If we were reading this in Hebrew, which is what this was originally written in, there's a lot of big things that would be very noticeable to us that we're going to have to point out here. But first of all, and it kind of came across here, the name Ishmael to her son, to Hagar's son. The name Ishmael, God says, I want you to call him Ishmael because the word Ishmael in Hebrew is God hears me. This is what the name Ishmael means. And you can see that in the verse. You shall call him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. So right away, what God says is, I've heard you. And then what Hagar says of God is, you are the God who sees me. And in Hebrew, she says, you are El Roi. You are the God who sees me. And in fact, the very place we're going to call this well, I have seen the God who sees me. So the idea here, and what the angel of the Lord does when he shows up, is what we all desperately need. God says, again, these two names are the solutions to most of our people problems here. God says, I have heard you, and I have seen you. I hear you, and I see you. What's so nice about this? What's so wonderful about this? Well, for those of you who are dealing with difficult people, and for those of you who aren't, that means for those of you who are difficult people. So for everyone who is a difficult person or is dealing with a difficult person, the solution is not to wait for the other person to get their act together, right? The solution depends on what? That solution depends on the problem in the first place. And it's a miserable thing to be waiting for the problem in the first place to fix their problem. If you're listening to a broken record over and over again, and every time it skips, you get more and more angry at the broken record, maybe the solution is to stop listening to the record for a little bit and focus on a different voice. What Hagar needed to hear is what all of us need to hear. God speaks to her in the wilderness, in the desperation, in the hopelessness, and he says, I see you and I hear you. I know what you're dealing with. I've seen what you're dealing with. I've heard your prayers. I've heard your cries. I know what you're going through. And for God to say, I see you, in the Hebrew, it's more than just, hey, I see what you're going through. It's, I understand what you're going through. When someone says that to us, that communicates that we are valued, that someone cares about us. And that's what a lot of us really desperately need at the root, is we want someone to really to value us, to care about us. But the amazing news for all of us is that despite in the middle of these horrible messes that we find ourselves in, even if we're the ones who have been doing it to ourselves, God comes to us in our desperation and says, I see you, I hear you, I understand. And not only that, God says, I want to bless you beyond all measure. He says to her, I'm going to come to you in the middle of your mess, and I'm going to bless you in the middle of your mess. I'm going to make your descendants, and you say, well, this whole thing is a total disaster. Later on, the next chapter, we read that the person who was really going to be the descendant of Abraham was a guy named Isaac. And Sarah did have a kid. If she would have just waited, I know it's easy for me to just say that, right? But if she would have just waited, Isaac was there. God had a plan for him all along. And Isaac, the birthright's going to go down from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to Joseph, all the way to Jesus. The line is clear. God has it set. He hasn't been worried about it this whole time. But meanwhile, we get into the mix and we muddle everything up. We make, a disaster of the whole situation, trying to do what we think God wants us to do. And here now a woman is pregnant who is not Abraham's wife, and she's alone in the desert, and here's this little baby, and what does God say? I'm going to bless this baby. I'm going to make, even though this is a mess, and you did this to yourself, and you found, and it's all, these are the people that God chose. God was the one who picked out Abraham, and God says, I'm going to bless you in the middle of this. I'm not going to hold it against you. I know people treated you wrongly, but I'm going to take care of you. That's what God says. Someone from the church emailed me just this week, and they have been going through a difficult time. And I'm not going to name names or anything, and I asked if they would mind if I shared this. But they said that they were just in the middle of a very lonely time, crying and felt hopeless. And God showed up in just a remarkable little coincidence. They were praying, desperate, lonely, and then all of a sudden, something happened that was just so remarkable that it just had to be. It was just one of those wonderful little coincidences. And they said, in the email, I'll just read what they said. They said, a huge weight left me, and I felt so much calmer. I thanked God for his wonderful mercy on my soul. And it wasn't so much the coincidence that did anything. It was just knowing that God was there in the situation. That's what they needed to hear. They say, I'm still struggling, but I wanted to share my beautiful, miraculous testimony with you. God is my rock, my friend, and my salvation. Amen. Just knowing in the middle of it, God's putting his hand on your shoulder, says, I know. I hear what you're saying. I see what happened here. Abram, Sarah, and Hagar, well, I don't know how much blame you want to put on Hagar, but they've messed things up pretty badly, right? If you for you Bible nerds, oh shoot, I shouldn't have gone down this path, but Ishmael, later on, the problems that we're having in the Middle East I don't know if you've heard the problems that we're having in the Middle East with the Muslims and the Jews and the Arabs and the conflict, this crazy conflict. Anyway, you can Google it. There's stuff going on in the Middle East, and it's been going on for a long, long time. It all began right here. This is where it all started right here. The Muslims say that because Ishmael was the firstborn, he was the one that should have got the birthright. It should have been going through the line of Ishmael. And the entire Muslim faith is built on the idea that we are the descendants of Ishmael. And everything that we have, everything that God promised should be ours because Ishmael was the firstborn. But nevertheless, God says, no, it's going to go through Isaac. But that's where it begins, literally. Again, you can Google this. Like, Abram and Sarah, like, thanks a lot, guys. You made a, I mean, we know, whatever your problems you made for yourself, they caused huge problems. We can look at our lives in desperation and feel hopeless sometimes. Either maybe we're stuck with the broken record or we find ourselves as that broken record. Usually it's both. It's a bit of both. But if this story teaches us anything, it doesn't matter the mess that you got yourself into or the hurt that you caused. God sees you right where you're at, and he wants to bless you in whatever rut you find yourself stuck in. You don't have to get your act together for God to be with you. God was the one that was running after Hagar and searching for Hagar and looking for her. You don't have to erase all your wrongdoings before God will have something to do with you. God wants to be with you right now, in the middle of the broken record stuff. You don't have to go back to the point where you strayed off the path with God so you can finally go and get back on the path with God. God says, I want to bring a new path to you right now where you're at, because the path is me. And I will be there wherever you're at. Don't feel like you've got a lot of work to do before you can start fixing the stuff where you went wrong with God. God says, no, we're going to start a new path right now. What about all that stuff? We're going to start a new path right now, and tomorrow I'll start a new path wherever you end up there. And tomorrow, the day after that, I'm going to start a new path wherever you end up there. God's mercies are new every morning. Amen? God says to Hagar, the thing we don't like in the story, I want you to go back. Right? Just because God will meet us wherever we're at, that's not an excuse for us to do whatever we want. God says, I want you to go back here. And we might say, well, nothing's different. God didn't fix anything in the situation. He didn't fix anything with Abram. He didn't fix anything with Sarah. Maybe he talked to them, but we don't read anything about it. But apparently, it was enough for Hagar that God saw her and heard her. That was enough for Hagar to say, okay, God, if you're with me in this, then I can do this. Because when we're seen and we're heard, like I said, then we are valued. It says somebody values us. And at the end of the day, that's what we desire and that's what we need. We want somebody to understand. We want somebody to see. We want somebody to be on our side. We want somebody to be with us. And you can run yourself ragged, and you can run relationships into the ground trying to force people to value you, and trying to force people to see you, and trying to force people to hear you and understand your side of the story and where you're coming from, so that they will know you, and they will see you, and they will hear you, and they will understand you, so that you can be valued by them. And yes, it's nice to be valued, but church, don't make your value dependent on somebody else. Don't say that I'm not going to be satisfied until I have that value from them, or I'm not going to be satisfied until they think better of me. Whoever your difficult person is in your life, or maybe it's online, your value, church, does not come from them even a little bit. It doesn't come from them. When you are looking for that from someone else, you're saying to them, and you're saying to yourself, my life has worth to the extent that you give me value. And that's not the case for the children of God. Our value is locked safe by God. Our value comes from God, who himself sees you and hears you and understands you. And we have great value because it's God who gives us that value. Because God does see us and he does hear us. And we can have peace in this life to the extent that we are satisfied in his value of us. Amen? Well, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord, I love to hear that you were out in the wilderness searching for Hagar in the middle of our mess. And I love to hear that even in the middle of Abraham and Sarah's mess and all the things that they caused, that you still blessed them with their own son. I love to hear that you blessed Hagar with her son that nobody asked for. Maybe Ishmael, thinking, hopefully he would never think his whole life that he was a mistake or the product of some bad relationship. But that you came to the middle of our mess and said, I'm going to bless you beyond all measure. Lord, thank you so much that in the middle of our people problems and all our broken records, Lord, that you will meet us right where we're at, that you will bless us right where we're at. And God, would you just, I pray a blessing on each and every one of us here, that we would all feel what that church member felt this week, that you're there, that we would all feel the hand on the small of our back and your voice saying, I hear you, I see you. God, I pray that when we can't be embraced or shake hands or do those things now, that you, Lord, would be the one that would embrace us and that would be satisfied in you. God, I pray, let us slow down this week so that we can hear these things. Let us slow down this week. God, I pray that we would give you time so that you can speak in whatever way you want to speak, that you see us and you hear us and you understand. Lord, thank you for that. Thank you that our value is locked safe, that we're not dependent on towing the line for some group or making sure everybody understands where we stand on everything and making sure that our voice is heard, Lord. I'm just thankful. And I pray that we could all find peace knowing that you value us more than anybody in this world ever could. And I'm thankful for that as well. Thank you so much, Lord, that you don't shy away from the people problems. They don't paint over it with a holiness brush, but you just lay it out exactly how it is so we can hear and see and learn and understand, God. And I pray that each one of us would go with your Spirit today and go with your Spirit in confidence, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, you are dismissed. Like I said last week, if you wouldn't mind, it's another beautiful day. If we could all congregate in the parking lot, that would be great. And again, be praying about who you're going to be inviting to the table. I want a couple more chairs by next week. We'll see you then.